And we are on a streak.
Anyway.
There you go. Number 4. Which statement is going to justify American imperialism? All right, so our correct answer, distant territories were important to national security. Okay. So a lot of you picked other nations had superior technology. In fact, during imperialism, we had the best technology compared to the ones we fought. Remember, like the Spanish, they are going to come in, and they have the wooden battleships. We have the steel battleships. So, you know, we were, as far as battleships, we were ahead of the game here. All right.
Battleship, yes.
All right. JF has the highest answer streak, so let's see what happens. All right. How did the Spanish-American War affect U.S. expansion?
I know this one. Yeah.
And so, as you have correctly deduced, Texas was part of the Mexican-American War. Just because they speak Spanish doesn't make them Mexico. All right. So it's actually going to be United States gained territories in the South Pacific. Now, the other one that tricked you is South America. Because it wasn't South America. It was the Caribbean and the Pacific. So, tricky question, but good one to go over for sure.
Panama Canal.
Do what, huh?
When did I was thinking of the Panama Canal.
Yeah, but then that would be a territory and not a territories. So if that makes sense. But yeah, the better ones here are going to be the best one is it. But well, and we don't get that as part of the Spanish-American War. That's going to happen in 1901. The Spanish-American War is 1898 because that was under McKinley, and then Teddy Roosevelt comes in and does the canal. So yeah, but I get where your thought process is there.
No.
Constance. All right, here we go. Number 6. Which of these did the U.S. do to acquire new markets? Choose as many as apply. All right, so very good. So the best answer is anything but chasing Pancho Villa. So pretty much we did not chase Pancho Villa to acquire new markets.
I thought open to a policy of like, that's the right one.
Well, it is, as is annexation of Hawaii, as is construction of
Yeah, because
Panama.
they give us all new territory.
Yeah,
Trade
you
and
are
such.
correct. All right, yeah, all of those help us acquire new markets. Okay,
They get
so let's see. All right, number 7. Which is Woodrow Wilson's foreign policy? They struggled with this last slide. All right, so it was moral diplomacy.
I was going to hit you.
Well, it's honestly, in my opinion, moral diplomacy is the forgotten diplomacy. And the reason I say it is the forgotten one is simply because it's the one we don't think about very much. We remember Big Stick. Big Stick was Teddy. Most of you picked dollar, which is the same thing. That was chosen by most of the people in third block. But remember, dollar diplomacy is by whom? Who's the dollar diplomacy? Taft. Yeah. Taft is dollar. All right. And then we have Open Door, which Open Door is going to be under President McKinley. It's in 1898. But yeah, remember Woodrow Wilson said he wanted to make the world safe for democracy. The idea was promoting good morals. Of course, that's the irony of Wilson is he wants to make it safe for democracy abroad, but at home he wants to limit who has a voice in their government. So he's very kind of hypocritical in that.
Right.
Two-sided. So all right. Okay. All right, tell me, he was known as a Rough Rider and enforced the Monroe Doctrine with a new policy.
I know who it is.
All right, so Teddy Roosevelt. That is going to be Teddy Roosevelt. Very good job. Teddy Roosevelt will be the one who is the Rough Rider and enforces the Monroe Doctrine. All right. Number 9. Where was the big stick used? Where was the big stick used? All right, so the big stick was definitely used in the Panama Canal because that is where Teddy goes in, guns blazing. Yeah. So Panama Canal. All right. So moving from Panama.
I went from first to fifth. Well, second to fifth.
It happens. All right. So the open door policy was all about is all about China. Absolutely. So remember, open door, boxers, spheres of influence. You should think China on all of those. Very good. Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. So
8 players hit an extra streak of 3.
let's see where y'all are going. We're going to hit the 4. Here we go. Which strategy is about creating economic stability by U.S. corporations?
Crisis diplomacy. I like fun.
Yeah, dollar diplomacy, economic stability, dollars instead of bullets. Y'all are scared not to mark moral now. All right. So Sarai is on that streak of 4. The purpose of the open door policy was to all right. So increase trade opportunity. Increase trade opportunity. That is the purpose of the open door. Very good. All right. Let's see. You're back with your answer choice 3. 2 more. The Roosevelt Corollary modified the original Monroe Doctrine by stating that. All right. Best answer. U.S. intervention in Latin America may be necessary on occasion.
Caitlin took my 5th place.
All right. Last one. The newspaper that claimed that the Maine was sank by the U.S., the newspapers were examples of. Yes. All right, so our best example, yellow journalism. Yellow journalism. So let's see where we ended up.
I was
All
only
right.
3 points behind Caitlin in 5th place. And then
All right, very good. Okay, guys, good job. All right, so let us go back to our World War II discussion. All right, So yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, we were kind of moving through the realms of the evil dictators. Is that correct?
Yeah, we were. Hold on, let me check. I think we just got past Hitler's.
I think we were somewhere in the Hitler regime, and I believe I have it marked in my notes. So
Yeah, nice.
let me. All right. So, I always kind of like to introduce the evil dictators, although I feel like you've already covered these guys, I'm sure, to at least some points in your class, just simply because we kind of need to go into having a general thing. I guess the last thing that I think we talked about.
Non-aggression pact. I believe.
Okay. All right. So we talked about the non-aggression pact. So where we want to go into, we did not talk about Blitzkrieg, I don't believe. We want to go into the early war today.
Early war?
The early war. Yeah,
Blitzkrieg is amazing. I like learning about it.
Mm-hmm. All right, so a little bit about Blitzkrieg. Remember, they could see the handwriting on the wall with Hitler. They could see that he was interested in going to Poland, and they kept saying, you don't go to Poland. If you stay out of Poland, we'll leave everything alone. And so it was one of those things that it was definitely in the works. And so what's going to happen is he, as expected, attacks Poland. Now, at the same time that Hitler is going to go into Poland, interestingly enough, you also, is it dead?
Oh, no.
Okay. All right. You're also going to have Russia going in on the other side of Poland. And so I kind of want to reiterate this because I see students struggle with this piece of information. Why don't we declare war on Russia?
Because we didn't tell Russia they could invade Poland.
Okay? So you didn't have the same sanctions on Russia that you did on Poland. And so realistically, we couldn't really limit them as much in that as we could, or as the United Nations, League of Nations, put on Germany. And so they don't really have a position where they can say, you don't do that. And so here they find themselves, and this is where they are. So I like this picture specifically because it shows you just how devastating this attack was. I mean, look at the territory there in Poland.
It's nothing. It's just
Absolutely. And so what Blitzkrieg really means is it means hitting them basically with everything that you have.
lightning war.
Mm-hmm. It's basically everything but the kitchen sink. You just pretty much try to knock them out. That is the goal there. And so that's where they find themselves. Now, when this happens, France mobilizes, and France is going to brace themselves for the Germans to attack. And the place that France mobilizes to, and I know you learned this last year, is the Maginot Line.
So they mobilized against the Germans?
Because they know they're coming. They've declared war on them, and they know the Germans are coming their way, so they mobilize to prepare to defend themselves, basically. Now, the Maginot Line is this line that the French built that was a brilliant idea for World War I. However, the time period in which we're in is not World War I, it is World War II. And so they're a little tardy to the party here. Basically, they have built a line that is ineffective for the time period in which they have built it. There is nothing about this Maginot Line that's a good idea at this point. It is actually a cemented trench. Now, think about the benefits here of cement. Well, you don't get trench foot. But with the technology they have, they either can fly over it or go around it. Yeah. And so basically they just ignore the Maginot Line, drive around, and they're on the other side of the French like, see you later. And so very quickly, they're going to take France. Around the same time that the war starts, there are going to be changes in the Holocaust. The Holocaust situation is going to be amped up. Now, why changes? Why were changes necessary? Well, I want you to think about this with me. If you were in the same position, we're going to war, and you believed that these people were a nuisance to you, you believed that there is no sanctity in human life, if you will. Those things were not important to you, and you saw people who did not fit into your vision as a burden, then you have to figure out how to relieve yourself of that burden.
Kill them all.
Well, Germany starts this whole eugenics process, this selective breeding. And parts of that include Hitler announces somewhat publicly that he is going to execute people who have physical and mental disabilities. In fact, about 70,000 people who were institutionalized permanently because of these disabilities, he announces he's going to execute them. It's kind of an interesting thing that he does here. Because I think too often when we think about Hitler, we think about him as having just this ridiculous amount of power. And so he announces that, and it doesn't go the way he expected. Because they start going, wait a minute, you're not going to kill all these people. And so from this, Hitler learns a very important lesson, which is?
Don't mess up.
Don't say what you're going to do.
Absolutely. Just do what you're going to do. Don't say it. Don't announce it. Keep it secret. And, I would honestly go as far not to compare what we did to the Japanese was wrong, but I think as wrong is a horrible term. It isn't quite to the level of what the Nazis are going to do with killing 15 million people. However, that Japanese internment was kept very, very private. Americans knew about it, but they thought that people who were potentially dangerous to the government were being locked up, not the massive number of Japanese who were being locked up. And so because of this, what you're going to see here is Hitler learns a lesson. Hitler learns that exactly what Meg said, you don't make your stuff public. Because when you make it public, people get angry, right? If they don't know, then they don't know. Perhaps something that you didn't like, you find out about it, but by the time you find out about it, it's already done. That point.
Here's just a door going down.
Something like that. And so anyway, to give you a statistic, by 1945, it's not a statistic you have to memorize, but I think it's significant. 275,000 people with mental and physical disabilities had been executed from all over Europe just because they had these disabilities. That's not including Jews and other people. Those are just people who were physically or mentally disabled, the weakest in society, essentially.
Within Europe?
Within Europe. They were gone. All right. So moving along, another thing to mention to you here, the Holocaust changes as well. When Germany and Russia are going to occupy Poland, the Jews are going to be rounded up and they're going to be moved from their homes into these newly built facilities. And when we think about things being newly built, we usually think about them being really nice. These were quickly thrown up apartments. And these apartments were very small. They were meant to hold less than a quarter of the people that they were holding. And And so, and so they are going to be moved into what will become known as the ghettos. All right, I need somebody to run to Miss Sullivan's room very quickly. Okay.
Hey, teachers, students, one interruption.
Hang on.
We're doing a test. I'm going to call back in about 20 seconds to do a check. Thank you.
All right. All right. Just give that to her.
Okay.
She'll know what it's about. All right. So anyway, what happens here in this early stage? What we begin to see is that some things just aren't right. And so these Jews see that they're being put in these ghettos. They're not happy. People who were Germans.
Thank you, teachers and students. We will make sure everybody can hear our bells and our announcements. You have a great rest of the day.
People who are Germans are going to get the houses that had belonged to these Polish Jews. They're going to move them in there. Is that the what?
Do you know anything about when the paper to register for voting? Like when
Oh, to register to vote? You didn't do it in your class today?
No, I'm not a, but I'm gonna be. So I
How
got
old are you?
I'm 17.
Okay.
But I got the form.
Mhm.
I just need to know like where to turn it in.
I don't know for sure, to be honest with you. You didn't.
Okay.
Yeah, you're talking about since you can use it later. You can go online and it'll
Yeah.
tell you exactly what to do. But I'm sure there's somewhere. It's probably I don't know if it's the courthouse.
I just got the form, so I don't know if I need to turn it into the school or what. Since
I
the school
can-
gave it out.
If you remind me, I can find out. No, you don't have to return it to the school.
Okay.
For sure, there's other places you can return it. But honestly, here in Jackson County, Mississippi, I'm just not sure. And I registered to vote a really long time ago in a different state, a different county. So, but yeah,
Okay, that's good.
yeah. Sorry, that's
That's okay.
not a lot of help to you.
That's good.
All right. So what are you going to see here? So a couple of things. First of all, we mentioned that you begin to have these changes in the Holocaust. You begin to have they're moved to the ghettos and they give their properties to these other people. And there's a great scene if you ever watched the film Schindler's List that I think really describes this very well. And there is this very rich Jewish family who is moved out of their Polish property. And in fact, they're moved out. There's all these valuables. And they're kind of angry because they had a very nice place. They were affluent. And when you watch the film, Schindler actually is who moves into their place. And he's like, things couldn't be better. And they arrive in their home in the ghetto. And they go, things couldn't possibly be worse. And so they arrive in this very, very small apartment, very close quarters. And then about another 8 people come in and enter to stay with them as well. And so they're all cramped in these extremely close quarters, which in these extremely close quarters means that disease spreads, other issues spreads. And so that is going to be the problem with, for lack of a better term here, the ghetto living in Poland. So let's talk about Dunkirk and the fall of France. Another really good film if you like war movies. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. Generally, I don't like I hate submarine movies. I don't know why. They bore me to death. I mean, it's a bunch of people on a submarine. Like, if you've ever been on a submarine, I would go absolutely crazy. In the Pacific, where we went to Hawaii, there is a submarine there, famous submarine called the Bowfin. And probably none of you watch the show, but there is an old show, and you can actually see the entire series on Netflix, not Netflix, Hulu, and it is called Lost.
Oh.
And if you've ever seen Lost, no, I don't think so. Was there a book?
Yeah, the series, the Lost series.
Yeah, I didn't know there was a book. So maybe I did. But anyway, in the Lost series, there's a submarine. And so if you've actually seen the series on television, the submarine there is the Bowfin. They actually filmed all of Lost except for about 32 minutes in Hawaii. And so everything is filmed there. But anyway, on the Bowfin, like, we went on there and there's about 10 of us on there. And I'm like, yeah, I'm done. And they would run like 40 or 50 people and you would be underwater for long amounts of time. And I'm like, yeah, that's just not, I don't have to have a lot of space, but still, I want a little more space than that. So anyway, if you get a chance to watch the film Dunkirk, what's interesting about it is there is no consistent dialogue. Like, when you think about watching a movie, you think about watching for the story and for, even if you like action. And when I found that out, like, I'd heard people say, oh, well, there's no dialogue. I was worried about how I would do with it if I'd kind of get over it. But what I found is it kept my attention. And what happens at Dunkirk is as France is defeated, Dunkirk is very close to Britain. It's where the English Channel is very thin between France and Britain. And so all of these sailors and servicemen are waiting from Britain, trying to get off France and to get back to their island because the Germans are bombing the crap out of France. And at this point, France is lost and they're about to surrender. And so they know they have to get out in order to not lose their soldiers, right? And so while these men are waiting in lines, literal lines, like you see in the water there, trying to get out of Dunkirk, the Germans are just bombing and bombing over the top of them and just massively killing them. And if you watch the film, it actually shows several English people who got in their personal boats and went across the channel trying to get soldiers out of Dunkirk and save them. And it's just a really good film, and it kept my attention. But I thought this picture from the alleyway here, where you can look down the alleyway and you can see the Eiffel Tower,
And then Nazi.
and then you can see where the Nazi flags are put on here, and they've been colored to kind of make the color pop on them. But I thought it was very telling. And so what happens to France is it falls to the Nazis. If you are interested in France and you like fiction, I read a really good fiction work on the resistance in France. Because there were large groups of people in France who quietly resisted. They made secret operations and all sorts of things like that. They're really, really neat. And the name of the book is The Nightingale. And it's actually historical fiction.
I've read that.
It's good. And I read enough of it that I actually would find there were parts in it that I would like, I don't know if that's true or not. And I would actually do research as I was going. And so when I did the program when we went to France, there was a 50-year-old lady who had a house near Normandy. And we read, she kept her journals. And she wrote these journals about living in her house and about the Germans coming in and taking over and moving her furniture and all of the things she disliked about the Germans. And you could just see the sass rolling off of this woman, with being upset about what was going on with her beloved property. And you can't blame her for that. Nobody wants somebody else to come in and take over your stuff. And so she, I can't think of her name right now. It's not rolling off my head. But anyway, that was one of the neat things for me, is to get to actually see her grave and to commemorate her sacrifice as well. Because on the home front, when you're taken over by another nation, it is something I hope we never face, but it's dramatic. And so what happens is the Brits are going to evacuate. By June of 1940, France signs an armistice. That means they surrender. They quit.
June 1940,
Mhm.
they signed an armistice.
Yes. And so Germany is going to set up headquarters in France, in Vichy, France. Now, what's interesting about France to me is Germany doesn't take over the southern part of France. But one of the things that I've learned about France, actually through teaching Western Civ, that I didn't think about. When you think about England, every location in England, anywhere you stand, you are within 20 miles of a navigable river, which made the Industrial Revolution happen. Because wherever you were, you could get on a river and you could ship stuff. 20 miles is not that far, even if you had to walk or take it by animal. In France, there are less rivers, and France is significantly bigger than Great Britain. And so if you start looking and you get in the southern part of France, Germany just basically said, yeah, we need this top part. France has surrendered. We'll let the bottom part be free. They just can't have any armies. And so in the southern parts, pretty much if you weren't Jewish, they left you alone. They did round up the Jews in northern France, though. And so this is a real thing. And so what begins to happen is they start their campaign against Britain.
Okay, so Germany started their campaign against Britain.
And so the Battle of Britain. So basically at this point, everyone has surrendered who's a major player except Great Britain. Great Britain is going to fight the Axis powers basically alone from June of 1940 until pretty much July, actually June of the following 1940 when Russia comes in. But Russia doesn't really help them because they're not helping them in the area that they are.
June of the following
41, sorry.
So-
40 to 41.
So June from 1940 to June of 1941.
Yes. Now, and as I said, when Russia comes in, it's really not that much more additional help to them. It's just kind of hope, if you will. Because now they know, well, at least the Russians are in it too, if that makes sense. And so what the Germans would do is they would just bomb the crap out of Britain every night. Every night from about midnight until about 4 or 5 in the morning, they would send planes over and drop bombs.
Isn't like Peter Pan, like kind of.
Peter Pan, one of the Harry Potters kind of mentions it, and The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I've seen those.
Wait, what
All
does
of
Peter
it.
Pan do?
In one of the openings of Peter Pan, you see them kind of trying to escape because there's bombing. But if you see the first Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, what happens in it is they've got the kids all down in a bomb shelter, and they're very afraid that something's going to happen to them. And so they send them off to live in the countryside, which is what a lot of British families would do. Because basically what you would do if you lived at this time and you were British is you would go, you would work in the factories and things during the day. If you were men, you were probably in the military. If you were female, you're expected to work. Some of the men would stay and work as well. And then at night, you would go, you would take your bath, you would get your clothes, you would leave your house, and you would go sleep in the subway if you lived in London. Because they're going to bomb the bejesus out of the place, and they may get your house that night. Interestingly enough, an article came out yesterday about a World War II era bomb being found in the Soho district. I was trying to find it real quickly.
Unarmed?
Unarmed. It's never exploded.
Oh, I've read that already. Yeah.
Yeah. And
that was
so
a while ago, wasn't it?
This one I don't think let me say this. I found out about it yesterday. But one of the guys, Miss Miley, is who sent it to me because one of Dave's, her husband's guys or friends, was actually working on the crew that found this. And so officers were called to a building site near Dean Street at 1:42 p.m. on the reports of a suspected explosive device, and it was a World War II unexploded bomb was found. And so, which means it could go off like at any time. So at any rate, they in London.
Wait, what part of the Harry Potter movie?
I don't remember, but I know there was one of them that kind of mentions about the fighting in London, or there's some like allusion or alluding to it. Do I have? Narnia, yeah, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is from Narnia is from that book. Yeah, sorry, I should have called it Narnia.
You know what I learned? The Cliffs of Moher in Dublin is actually mainly used for Harry Potter.
Interesting. Interesting. It's interesting how different spaces.
I can't remember what it was called, but it's basically used for some of the Harry Potter, like you know the cliffs that they normally go on, the one that Gandalf fell off of.
Gandalf is not in Harry Potter. Is that what you said?
You mean Dumbledore?
Dumbledore, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, because the Gandalf and the those were filmed in New Zealand.
Yeah.
It's
Dublin, Ireland. It's the capital.
The Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings is what he's thinking about. All right. So these pictures, though, I mean, this is London Bridge, and all around London, you see it just burning. You know, and think about how like odd that would be at night. You know, just laying in the subway, just sitting there thinking everything's burning. You know, not knowing if you would get up and your flat would still be there or whatnot. All right.
The melody from London Bridge sounds a lot more morbid now.
Yeah, it is pretty morbid. All right. So anyway, here's where we find themselves. FDR and the U.S. are not really ready to quite go in yet. At the same time, the Nazis are making some different choices where they are. They're moving to what's going to be called the final solution. The final solution. So they have more Jews. They have Jews from newly conquered territories. Hundreds of thousands of gypsies were transported to the Polish ghettos as well. In June of 1941 is when Germany is going to decide to invade the USSR. And we know that was Hitler's biggest mistake. It was actually, that's a good thing because we don't want Hitler to win here. But it's really what causes him to be defeated.
So Hitler made a huge mistake by invading Russia.
Oh, absolutely. Never invade Russia. It never goes well for anybody. Napoleon, Hitler, 2 for 2. All right.
Someone's like, how about no?
Yeah. So what's going to happen basically is they start trying to figure out what they're going to do. They establish these new killing units. I'm not concerned that you know the name of them, but they're the Esslengruppen. They're one of the most violent units of the Nazi group. And so they kill, at this time period, about 500,000 Soviet Jews. They don't bring them back. They just slaughter them.
Don't you just drive around in truck in like vehicles?
They are shooters, yes. Most of them is just, they just shoot. And they would go into areas where they would fight the Soviets, and they would come up, and if there were people there, they would see them. More than likely, they would just shoot. To say it was brutal would be a severe understatement. All right. So at any rate, some other key things are going to happen, though. By September of 1941, if you were a Jew, you were expected to wear the star. You were expected to wear the star. And expected really doesn't give quite the implication that needs to be here. You wore the star, or if you were found without it, you were killed. So it was mandatory. Also with this, there is a camp called Auschwitz, and Auschwitz is very close to Krakow. Krakow is a
What was the
town
star name
in,
again?
I'm sorry?
What was the star name again?
You're talking about
The
the
true star.
Star of David.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. But so anyway, the Star of David, it was mandatory. And so Krakow is very close. The name of Krakow may not really ring a bell to you, but what probably will ring a bell to you is Auschwitz. And so Auschwitz is very close to Krakow. And it is going to be here that they first try this strategy. They're going to gas 500 Soviets.
On which camp? Auschwitz.
Yes. They're POWs, and they're going to try this pesticide called Zyklon B, and it works. It works beautifully for what they're trying to do. They put the gas in. It's very simple. It comes in pellets, and they come back in just a few minutes, and everybody's dead. And so it seems they have reached the final solution. And so feeling confident in this, the Nazis are going to place massive orders with the pesticide company for Zyklon B. All right. So a little bit more about other Holocaust death camps that we want to discuss. From 1941 to 45, so they're going to start to empty out the ghettos.
What was the guy's name again?
I'm sorry?
What was the guy's name again? Zyklon Z?
Zyklon B.
Zyklon.
So they're going to start to empty out the ghettos. Why? Because they were overcrowded, and pretty much they were also having to take care of these. They were having to police them. And so they start to move the people out of the ghettos into trains. The trains, they're packed in very tightly, as we know, and they would send them, they would get to wherever their destination was. And when they got there, they would separate them. Now, before they would send them, they would put men in one car and women in the other. And then once you arrived, they would go through and they would separate the sick from the healthy. What it meant to be healthy is they believed that you could work. And if they believed you could work, they believed they could keep you and use you until they killed you, pretty much. And so that is what they do. They continue to separate sick and the healthy.
This was from 1941 to 1945.
And so what's going to happen here is usually the sick, the old, and the children were the first to be gassed because they were not useful in work. And so they did not see a need for them. The first gassing is going to start at a camp. You don't have to know this name, but it's Belzec. It's near Lublin. That takes place on 3/17/1942. 5 more killing centers are going to be built in Poland. Just so you've heard the name, Chelmno, Sobibor, which is a really kind of interesting camp. You actually have people that successfully managed to escape from Sobibor. There's a pretty good film. It's old. There's a good film on it. Also, let's see, Sobibor, Slebno, Treblinka. Treblinka is considered to be one of the harshest concentration camps, which is pretty severe when you call it a harsh concentration camp. Majinek, and then also Auschwitz-Birkenau is going to be the other one that is so significant. So what is interesting, though, is what's going to happen in the Warsaw Ghetto. So the people in Warsaw, they're kind of fed up. They're fed up with disease. Do what? Yes, just the words. It's a compound word. They're fed up with disease. They're fed up with mistreatment. They're fed up with all of these things that have been going on, and they decide to revolt. Now, when I picture revolts, I picture small amounts of people, things like that. The revolt at Warsaw is extremely massive. It lasts for about a month. If you like specific dates, April 18th to May 16th, 1943. 7,000 Jews are going to be shot and killed in the Warsaw Ghetto as part of the revolt. Another 50,000 are going to be cleared out, and they're going to send them to extermination camps. They really don't give them a chance.
How many?
7,000 were killed at the uprising, and 50,000 were sent out and were executed. Now, what was the success of them then? You fall back and everybody dies. Yeah, but they do start to inspire others that maybe you can resist. Maybe you can fight the system, if you will. All right. And then the numbers from these camps is just so overwhelming because we start throwing around numbers and they become like inconsequential. There we go. Auschwitz itself killed 2 million people. One camp. 2 million people died. Unbelievable that they reported. And one thing about the Germans that's very interesting, of course, a lot of times when people refer to someone as a Nazi, they're often referred to the fact that they're very meticulous and things like that. And they were meticulous with details. If you're familiar with, they would tattoo the Jews, and actually they would tattoo all the prisoners. But the reason that's a big deal with Jewish custom is the Torah forbids marking your body. And so with their culture, that was kind of disgraceful, if you will, for them to have this tattoo, and especially to have that, to have this mark on them where they were marked to be a prisoner. And with that, they kept up with these people. Like, they can tell you where they got transferred to and a lot of information about many of them. If they made it to that point, they know what happened to them. Now, a lot of the people who died before, those numbers are gone and lost. But the people who made it to the camps, there was a lot of paperwork. So anyway, what's also going to happen is in 1943, something huge happens in Auschwitz if you're kind of interested in Auschwitz in general, and that is going to be the arrival of Dr. Joseph Mengele. And Dr. Mengele is famous for doing experiments on the twins. Yeah. We were asking your sister, yes, earlier, which one of you would be the control subject. And but yeah. Mengele. Do I know?
It's an experimenting on.
Okay. And actually, he is absolutely nuts. One of the things, I don't think I told this to this class, but I ran across this really weird documentary a few years ago, and I kind of got slightly obsessed with it. So Mengele was this weird guy, obviously. If you just want to do all of these weird medical experiments, on the flip side, there are things we know medically that we would not know if it wasn't for Mengele's testing. So it's kind of it's not a good thing, but there have been things that have come out of it that we know that we would not know just because of how horrible the things that he did were. Those were things we wouldn't do human testing on, And so anyway, one of his obsessions was people with dwarfism, with the dwarfism gene.
Oh, God.
And so there was a group of gypsies that came through, and it was a group of 7 people who were dwarfs. I know the irony here. And they were like from 4 different families. Some of them were related, some of them were not. And they thought that they might have a better chance of survival if they lied and said they were all related. And so they needed to be on the guards needed to be on the lookout for twins and for dwarfs and other people. And so when they saw all of these dwarf gypsies, they like round them up. And they bring them in and they asked them, they said, "Are you all related?" And they said, "Yes." And so he did experiments on them. But what's weird is he kind of befriends them. I mean, because you don't think of Mengele and be like, oh, he's fuzzy, But he would come down at night because apparently Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs was his favorite fairy tale. And he would bring his accordion and he would play and they would all dance and have a good time. One of the women that was on the documentary, who was one of the dwarfs, she talked about it. She said, "I really liked him." I'm like, no. But anyway, he was a sick man.
Did he kill them?
To say the least. None of the dwarfs died. They all survived, but he kept them as almost like a collection, if you will. But anyway. All right, so let's get back to America, and let's talk about the shift in American policy. The shift in American policy. All right, so here's where we are. We're seeing all of these things that are going on with policies in general, and so let's talk about how this is going to affect America. So FDR is in his 3rd term. When he runs in 1940, it is an unprecedented thing when he is elected. Now, we know Theodore Roosevelt ran for a 3rd term once, but he did not achieve election. But FDR does. Of course, Teddy Roosevelt wasn't supported by the major parties, so it's very hard to get elected with the third party, as we know, pretty much near impossible, but it is going to happen here for FDR. And so with this, he realizes what's going on in Europe. And so our allies are at a point that they are losing. And if we don't help them, very well, they will lose. Sometimes you do what's right, not because it fits your standards, but because it's what you should do. A lot of people are very passive, and they like to be passive, and they like to stay out of things, but there has to be a point where you have to speak up. And this is where FDR kind of finds himself here. At some point, if we don't defend Britain and we don't help our allies, eventually they're all going to lose. And there's going to be this hugely powerful nation, and we're going to find ourselves in a position where we have to face off with that nation. And so the decision is made that perhaps we need to handle this differently. Perhaps we need to handle this differently. And so what we're going to end up doing is we are going to start lending and leasing supplies to the allies. We're going to lend and lease supplies to them. Now, how do you lend someone bullets?
Trading.
I mean, seriously, how do you lend them bullets, right? You know, that's like when people will say, can I borrow a piece of gum? They really don't mean they want to borrow the piece of gum. You don't want them to just borrow the piece of gum. You're okay if you could just let it go. You know, you're okay if they can just have the gum more so than you getting that gum back. And so anyway, what ends up happening at this point, sorry, I got to respond to this. All right, so what ends up happening with this is the U.S. is here. And so we decided it's better to lend to our allies than to have to handle this ourselves. And so we instead will assist them. So that's where we are. So examples of this, we also are going to trade them out some bombers and some other planes in exchange for use of their bases. And this is how we gain some of the military bases we have around the world. That's with this.
Awesome.
World War II is dramatically different. And so also with this, we are going to change some other things as well. So lending and leasing is just part of it. The other part is we declare that we will no longer trade with any Axis nations. We will no longer trade with any nations that are threatening independence for any other nations. And so by doing that, the nation that we cut off that is the most dangerous is Japan. And I'll go ahead and just do this. We cut off, come on, Japan. All right, all right, there we go. All right, so we cut off we embargoed Japan. And Japan was very dependent upon us for things that they had. They were very dependent upon us for things that they had. And so by us cutting them off, it kind of puts them in a little bit of shortage. And so we know something's going to come out of it, but it doesn't come out yet. Now, the other thing that's going to happen is FDR and Churchill are going to sit down and they're going to have a very important meeting. And that very important meeting is called the Atlantic Charter. At the Atlantic Charter, a few key things are going to happen. Roosevelt acquiesces that at some point the U.S. is going to come in the war. He doesn't promise that we'll come in now. He doesn't promise that we will come in tomorrow, but he says at some point we're going to come in. At some point we will join you. We'll let you know when that's going to be, kind of thing. Okay? And so they're kind of like, okay, well, that's cool. So at some point we're coming in. Second, also, we promise that when we do, that we will give our full support to the war effort. I think that's the case again. We will give our full support to the war effort. What that means is that if we have resources, they have access to our resources. So, quid pro quo. If we have it, they can use it. Also, along with those two things, as well, we will, what am I missing? We agreed to some things for post-war. No territory will be lost, and no territory will be gained. Now, I want you to think about that. This is something that Wilson begged us to do in World War I, but it doesn't go the way that he asked for it to because secret treaties were honored. Well, FDR and Churchill decide that's not going to be the case, that they're going to make sure that is not the case. Also, no reparations, no payments.
Ooh.
No reparations. And last but not least, there will be some sort of a United Nations group at the end of the war. They know that the League of Nations was the right idea, but it just didn't work in the right way. And so they basically decide that there will be something like that after the war is over. They don't know what, but there will be something. All right. So this brings us to where we are when Pearl Harbor starts. So I want to share some statistics with you. I like statistics, and the reason I always say I like statistics is statistics. I like numbers when it kind of gives me an idea about things. So to kind of show you some of the problems that we're going to have in Hawaii. First of all, remember, we were pretty far down the list when it came to militaries, right?
Yes.
We talked about that yesterday, 17th and 19th in size. And so here is what a number that I wanted to share with you, a couple of numbers here. In December before the war breaks out, the U.S. knows it's coming. The president and his people know it's coming. And they think they have figured out where it's going to take place. Now, here's the key thing. Sometimes, well, you have to make choices based on the information you have. And sometimes you're right.
Sometimes you're wrong.
And sometimes you're wrong. And in this circumstance, when we go back to the Spanish-American War where Teddy Roosevelt said, well, eventually we're going to go to war. Let's send our ships to Hong Kong. And as soon as they declare war, we will attack the Philippines. Done. We're there. It paid off. Totally. Because we were there. This time, we decide to send our ships to Hawaii because we think the Japanese are going to attack the Philippines. The Philippines are significantly closer. Hawaii would put our ships halfway there. And so they could bust across that ocean really quickly. All of those big battleships, boom, boom, and they can take care of the problems of the Philippines. We had them lined up in neat rows because we did not think they would make it to Hawaii. We thought they were out of reach. And so to start, when the war starts and Japan attacks us, we have in total 300 combat ships for the entire U.S. Navy.
It's not too bad.
Well, to give you an idea, at the end of the war, we have 1,167 major ships. And think about how many ships sank.
A lot.
Out of those original 300 guys, only one pre-war vessel was still in the fleet.
Really?
The others were either sank or decommissioned. At the end of the war, so that means that we had all of those 1167, except for one, were built during the war. And that doesn't account for all the others that were built that sank, because there were many ships that were sank that were American ships. To add to this, there were 2,300 aircraft at the end of the war. So we went from being this tiny little military to being this huge entity. George Marshall is going to be the chief of staff of the Army. He is going to be the head position. And he's really interesting. I finished reading, well, I guess about a year ago, actually now. I read Killing Patton. I told you I like the Killing series and that those are good. And the Killing Patton, one of the things I found out is Eisenhower was kind of an interesting choice because he was young at the time. He wasn't this experienced general. Eisenhower himself never fought in a single battle. He commanded battles. But the man commanded battles and never fought in them is considered one of the greatest generals. So he did something right. But he tended to appoint newer generals instead of the older generals because he thought some of them were outdated. And he thought newer guys would have newer strategies. And so that was kind of his philosophy. All right, so I want to read a story for you. One of the things, probably aside from travel, my favorite part of the experience that I had the last couple of years with the History Day programs, one of those was the new reading that it introduced me to, because honestly, we get to where we become very, especially as a teacher, I've taught U.S. history for a long time. I've taught the bombing of Pearl Harbor for a long time. And you get to where you teach your stories in your same way, and it becomes familiar. It becomes just as normal as telling a family story or whatnot, which you'll see. I'll talk about my family a pretty good bit over the next little bit. But we had to do a lot of reading and a lot of assignments. And this was a reading in particular that stuck with me. This is an interesting little book. It's by a guy named Stud Terkel. And what he did is he took primary sources from people who were in all sorts of walks of life during World War II. And he shares their story. And all sorts of races, all sorts of different situations, but it's different Americans, and it's called The Good War. And so this particular one, and it's actually the very first story in the book, was one that has stuck with me. Out of all the stuff that I read in here and the others, it's one of the things that stayed with me. And it's about a guy named John Garcia, who I know you can tell exactly from his name that he was Hawaiian. He sounds exactly Hawaiian, doesn't he? And so I'm going to read the description of John Garcia to you at first. I think sometimes when you kind of can see somebody when you hear their story, it makes an impression on you. John Garcia, a huge man, built along the lines of a sumo wrestler. He manages a complex of apartments in Los Angeles, and he could quite easily be a bouncer too. He is resigned to the assortment of illnesses that plague him. With his poor health, his manner is easygoing, and with my age, he said, and my love for food, that's caused diabetes and the whole bit. He himself is a Hawaiian. So this is John's story. I was 16 years old and employed as a pipe fitting apprentice at Pearl Harbor Navy Yard. On December 7th, 1941, around 8 a.m., my grandmother woke me up. She informed me the Japanese were bombing Pearl Harbor. I said, Grandma, go back to bed. They're just practicing. She said, no, it was real. And the announcer had requested that all Pearl Harbor workers report to work. I went out on the porch and I could see the anti-aircraft fire up the skies. And I just said, oh boy. I was 4 miles away. I got on my motorcycle and I took it 5-10 minutes to get there. It was a mess. I was working on the USS Shaw. It was a floating dry dock and it was in flames. I started to go down into the pipe fitter's shop to get my toolbox, and then another wave of Japanese came in. I got under a set of concrete steps at the dry dock where the battleship Pennsylvania was. An officer came by, and he asked me to go into the Pennsylvania and to try to get the fires out. A bomb had penetrated the marine deck, and there were 3 decks below. Under that was the magazines of ammunition, powder, and shells, and I said, there ain't no way I'm going down there. I could blow up any minute. I was young, and I was 16, and I was stupid, and not at 62 cents an hour, it wasn't going to happen. A week later, they brought me before the Navy court, and it was determined that I was not service personnel, and therefore I could not be ordered. There was no martial law at the time. Because I was 16 and had gone into the water, the whole thing was dropped. I was asked by some other officers to go into the water and to get sailors out that had been blown off the ship. Some were unconscious and some were dead. So I spent the rest of the day swimming inside the harbor alone with some other Hawaiians. I brought out that I didn't know how many bodies, how many were alive, and how many were dead. Another man would put them into the ambulances, and they'd be gone. We worked all day that day. At evening, I drove a truckload of Marines into Palo Valley because someone reported the Japanese had parachuted down there. Because of the total blackout, none of the Marine drivers knew how to get there. It was 2 miles away. There were no parachuters. Someone at the valley had turned their lights on, and the Marines stared, shooting at the house. The lights went out. I went back to the concrete steps to spend the night there, and someone on the Pennsylvania was walking along the edge of the armor plate. He lit a cigarette, and all of a sudden, a lot of guns opened up on him. I don't know if he was hit or not. The following morning, I went with my tools to the West Virginia. It had turned turtle. In other words, it had flipped upside down, is what he means by that. We found a number of men inside. The Arizona was a total washout, also the Utah. There were men inside there too. We spent about a month cutting the superstructure of the West Virginia, tilting it back on its hull. After about 300 men we cut out of there were still alive by the 18th day. They were in the water and they survived for 18 days, which is amazing. How did they survive? I don't know. We were too busy to ask, he laughed. It took 2 weeks to get out all the fires, and we worked around the clock for 3 days. There was so much excitement and confusion. Some of our sailors were shooting 5-inch guns at the Japanese planes. You know, you cannot gun down a plane with a 5-inch shell. They were landing in Honolulu and unexploded naval shells, and they had a 10-mile range, and they hurt a lot of people in the city. When I came back after the 3rd day, they told me the shell had hit the house of my girl. We had been going together, for about 3 years. Her house was a few blocks from my place, and at that time, they said it was a Japanese bomb. Later, we learned it was an American shell. She was killed. She was preparing for church at the time. The neighbors met me. They were mostly Japanese, and we all started to cry. We had no idea what was happening or what was going to happen. And so anyway, his story continues on. He talks about how he was so inspired as a 16-year-old after pulling all of these people out that he felt like after watching those men sacrifice that he had to do something. And he ends up going and he joins in the war. And he survives the war, but he comes home an alcoholic. He comes home hurt, and that's why he talks about becoming a diabetic because of all the things the choices that he made. But anyway, that story was one of just this 16-year-old boy. Oahu was attacked. Oahu is the 2nd largest island in Hawaii, and it was brutally attacked. And there's a couple of things about the attack I want to mention to you. This takes place on December 7th. To give you a statistic, 2,335 civilians and soldiers were killed on the island of Oahu in this attack. The first, a very significant man at this battle, I always like to mention things with minorities and accomplishments connected to minorities. And one of those accomplishments that I like to mention here is Dory Miller. Dory Miller is the man at the left. And if you know Dory Miller's story here, he, if you've seen the film, he's going to go in and okay, he is going to go in and he is going to run onto the ship. He takes on the armaments, puts the gunner on himself, and he starts to shoot down planes. Now, he wasn't an armor guy. That wasn't his job. He wasn't trained in infantry. He himself was trained simply to be a cook. But he decided that he was not going to stand by. And so because of this, he ends up winning the Navy Cross. Now, because I have some NJROTC people, you may be a little more familiar with the Navy Cross. But for most of you, the Navy Cross is basically the Navy's version of the Medal of Honor. The Medal of Honor is an Army thing, right? If I'm not mistaken on that.
Yep.
So the Navy Cross is the highest honor that you can receive here. All right. So moving along, the other person I wanted to mention to you here is this gentleman at the bottom. Now, he's an older white guy, and something that may catch your attention about him is what kind of uniform is that? No, he's Navy. Is that an enlisted man's uniform?
Nope.
No, he's an officer. This is Captain Kidd. Captain Kidd was on the Arizona on one of the highest parts when the Japanese started to attack. And one of the bombs that explodes on the Arizona is going to completely disseminate him, basically. All that was found of Captain Kidd was his ring in the top of the Arizona. They still have his class ring, and it is on display at the Pearl Harbor Aviation Museum. That was it. I mean, the bomb was so much that it literally blew him to pieces, and the ring literally blew off his hand into the piece behind him. The reason Captain Kidd kind of stood out to me is because one of the teams that were in Hawaii with us, his high school was the high school that the student attended. And so they chose him for their silent hero, as he's honored on the wall as his body was obviously never recovered. but he died on the USS Arizona with that. And so I like to mention him as well, just because of being able to honor him when we were in Pearl Harbor. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the American home front. We will let's do that tomorrow. So it looks like our time is, we got about 2.5 minutes. So we will talk about that tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Left